The rain came down in sheets, hammering the empty highway like nails sealing a coffin. Headlights cut through the storm, illuminating a forgotten gas station crouched beside the road. Its flickering neon sign sputtered half-dead letters, promising fuel and coffee, though no car had stopped there in hours, maybe in years. The trucker eased off the accelerator. His rig groaned, his fuel gauge sank, and that dying neon glow was the only lifeline for miles. The station looked wrong from the start. One pump leaned sideways, its hose dangling like a severed vein. The windows were stained with decades of grime, yet inside, there was light, a humming fluorescence that didn't match the ruin outside. Something about that glow was too steady, too alive, as though it had been waiting, just for him. He pulled in. Gravel crunched under the tires, echoing louder than it should in the storm. The rain softened, almost unnaturally, the moment he cut the engine. He noticed then. There were no insects buzzing around the lamps, no smell of gasoline, no sound at all, only the throb of his own heartbeat inside his skull. The silence pressed in like a weight. Through the smeared glass, a figure shifted. A man, thin, motionless, stood behind the counter. His face, pale under the light, didn't move when the trucker stepped out into the rain. No nod, no welcome, just empty eyes, watching. The trucker's boots hit the wet gravel, each step loud enough to remind him he was utterly alone. And yet, not alone at all. The storm held its breath as he reached the door. The handle was ice cold. Inside, the man's stillness turned unbearable, like a mannequin daring him to step closer. Something deep inside screamed that this station wasn't alive anymore, that it was just pretending. But the fuel gauge in his truck was nearly empty. He had no choice but to enter. And when he did, the lights inside should have gone out. The door creaked shut behind him, sealing out the storm but trapping him in something far worse. That first step into the gas station marked the beginning of a story whispered among truckers, the kind of tale they tell only when the coffee's strong and the night outside is endless. A story about the gas station that should have been abandoned. This wasn't just another stop along the highway. It was a fracture in the world, a place that defied time and reason. The man behind the counter wasn't a cashier, not anymore. He was something older, something patient. And every driver who stumbled in, desperate for fuel, walked into a place that wasn't built for the living. If you're hearing this, you've joined the circle of listeners who dare follow America's haunted roads. Here, every mile hides a memory soaked in diesel, blood, and silence. This station is just one piece of that darkness, but it's one of the deepest. Because only one man lived to tell what happened inside, and even his voice trembled when he spoke of it. If you're listening right now, subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from, your country and your city. You're part of this haunted journey now, and the road only gets darker the further we go. The trucker should have kept driving that night. He should have let the storm swallow him, should have risked the empty tank rather than pull into a place that pulsed with unnatural life. But he didn't. And what waited for him behind that counter, beyond the shelves and deep in the station's forgotten rooms, would make him wish he had never slowed down. The fluorescent hum filled the station like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. It droned steadily, vibrating in the bones of the walls, crawling under the trucker's skin. He stood just inside the doorway, rainwater dripping from his jacket, forming small, shining puddles around his boots. The air was wrong, stale and heavy, like a basement locked for half a century. Underneath it was another smell, sharp and metallic. Not the tang of gasoline he had expected, but something closer to rust. Or blood. The man behind the counter did not move. He stood as though carved in place, thin and pale, skin stretched tight across his face like parchment. The lights above bleached him in sickly color, draining any warmth. But it wasn't his stillness that made the trucker's gut knot. It was his eyes. They didn't blink. They weren't focused on him either. They looked through him, past him, like he was just a shadow cast against the glass. And then, slowly, impossibly, the corners of his mouth curled upward. A brittle smile, the kind of expression a mannequin might wear if it tried to learn human emotion. The trucker cleared his throat, his own voice sounding too loud in the silence. "Need a fill-up." he muttered. The words seemed to die before they reached the man. Pump outside work? For a long moment, nothing. The hum swelled in the quiet. Then the man's jaw unlocked with a faint crack, his lips parting as if the motion had grown unfamiliar. The voice that followed was not natural speech. It was gravel dragged across a coffin lid. "Pump's waiting for you. Been waiting a long time." A shiver licked the trucker's spine. He glanced around the station. The shelves looked stocked, but wrong. The brands were old, decades out of date, rows of soda in glass bottles with labels that hadn't been printed since the 70s, candy bars sealed in faded wrappers, gum packages yellowed at the edges. None of it was disturbed. Not a wrapper bent, not a layer of dust brushed aside, as if the place wasn't meant to serve customers, only to preserve an illusion of normalcy. He shifted uneasily, forcing his boots across the tiled floor. The sound echoed too loudly, bouncing back at him like the station itself wanted to remind him how empty it was. The man's eyes finally tracked his movement, slow and grinding, like gears catching after years of rust. The closer he came to the counter, the colder the air grew, prickling across his skin as though the building itself exhaled frost. When his hand brushed the countertop, his breath caught. The surface was slick. He pulled back, fingers sticky, dark smears glistening against his skin. Too warm, too thick. His mind told him it was oil, some leaking fluid, but his senses screamed otherwise. He wiped his hand against his jeans, but the stain only spread, sinking into the fabric. The man leaned forward across the counter, his thin frame creaking like timber in a storm. His lips cracked wider into that impossible smile. "You came on a good night," he whispered, the words dragging like nails. "The storm keeps others away, but it brings the hungry things closer." The trucker's stomach tightened. His mind raced with questions, but none dared cross his lips. Instead, he turned toward the window, where rain streaked down in glistening veins. For an instant through the glass, he swore he saw something move near the pumps. Something low, something crawling. The shadows bent too unnaturally, and then the rain swallowed them whole. The man's hand twitched against the register, a slow, rhythmic tapping. The sound reverberated through the hollow walls, too deep, too loud, as if the counter itself was hollow and waiting. The trucker tried again, voice strained but steady. "Just need gas, that's all." The man tilted his head at an unnatural angle, joints popping audibly in the silence. His smile stretched wider, pulling skin too thin. "That's all any of you ever need," he rasped. "But none of you leave with just gas." The fluorescent lights overhead sputtered, their hum climbing into a painful whine. Then, without warning, they flickered violently and went out. Darkness swallowed the station whole. For a single, endless heartbeat, the trucker was blind, and in that blackness he felt the man's face was no longer human. When the lights buzzed back to life, the figure behind the counter hadn't moved. He still stood smiling, but the grin had widened, grotesquely, stretching farther than flesh should allow. His eyes no longer stared past the trucker. They locked onto him, sharp and deliberate. Waiting, not for gas, not for payment, waiting for him. As though the storm had delivered the trucker exactly where the station had wanted him all along. And somewhere beyond the glass, in the crawling dark by the pumps, something else was waiting too. The trucker's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He tore his eyes from the man at the counter, that smile still stretched too far, and forced his boots toward the aisles. He told himself it was just to look around, to pass the time until the storm eased. But deep down, he knew he was stalling against what the man might say next. The aisles were long, longer than they should have been. From outside, the building had looked no larger than a standard roadside stop. But once he stepped between the shelves, the station seemed to stretch. Rows of canned goods and snacks leaned in on him, pressing shadows across the floor. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, humming in nervous pulses as though they too were struggling to survive in this place. He trailed his hand along one of the shelves, dust lifting in gray clouds. Every item was wrong, like a museum of abandoned brands. Glass soda bottles with logos faded decades ago. Boxes of cereal featuring mascots he half remembered from childhood. A row of soup cans, their labels warped. ink running down as if the paper had wept. None of it was fresh. None of it was alive. Yet the shelves were perfectly stocked, as if someone, or something, had arranged them with care. Halfway down the aisle, he paused. There was sound now, soft, deliberate, the scrape of something dragging across tile, slow, wet, coming from the far end. He froze, breath held, ears straining against the hum. The sound stopped when he stopped. He forced himself to move again, each boot heavier than the last. His shadow stretched unnaturally along the shelves, bending, splitting, as if the lights above were shifting in ways the bulbs shouldn't allow. At the next intersection, he turned and froze. A second aisle stretched before him, identical to the first. The same boxes, the same bottles, the same soup cans with their weeping labels. Perfect copies, row after row, vanishing into flickering light. He glanced back. The aisle he'd come from was gone, swallowed in dimness. The counter and the pale man no longer in sight. His pulse thundered in his ears. He reached for a soup can, hands trembling. The label slipped away at his touch, peeling like wet skin. Beneath it wasn't metal at all, but something softer, flesh-like, trembling beneath his grip. He dropped it, heart lurching, as the can hit the tile with a wet, meaty thud instead of a metallic clang. The sound carried down the aisle, and something answered. A shuffle, a breath, the sound of something retreating into the shelves. He stumbled back, eyes scanning the rows, every shadow now too deep, every gap between products a possible hiding place. The fluorescent hum grew louder. He realized, suddenly, it wasn't humming. It was whispering. Words he couldn't understand, crawling in static through the bulbs. His head spun. He pressed his palms to his temples, but the whispers slid between his fingers, winding into his skull. He staggered forward, desperate to find the counter again, to anchor himself in something familiar, even if it meant facing that grotesque smile. But when he turned the corner, the shelves shifted again, longer, taller, the aisles stretching into infinity. The storm outside might as well have been another world. Then, movement. Low, hunched between the rows. A shape scuttling too quickly, too many limbs bending at wrong angles. He caught only glimpses, slick skin, fingers too long, a glint of wet eyes watching him from the gaps in the shelves. The dragging sound returned, closer this time, following him. The trucker's boots slapped against the tile as he pushed himself into a run. The aisles seemed to close in, shelves leaning, labels shifting. Every turn brought only more shelves, more whispering lights, more glimpses of that crawling thing in the corner of his eye. And then, silence. His own breath roared in his ears, but the whispers stopped. The scuttling stopped. He stood alone in a frozen aisle, sweat pouring down his back. At the far end, just visible in the flickering glow, stood the man from the counter. Still, smiling. But he wasn't at the counter anymore. He was waiting at the end of the aisle. The trucker froze, heart hammering against his ribs. At the end of the aisle, under the flickering light, the man stood as if he had never left his post. Thin, motionless, still carved with that grotesque smile. The trucker blinked once, and for a heartbeat the aisle was empty. He blinked again, and the man was back. Closer this time, head tilted in that unnatural angle, eyes locked directly onto him. Panic clawed at his throat. He stumbled backward, his boots squealing against the tile. The aisles seemed to close in, shadows bending, shelves groaning like trees in the wind. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He just needed a door, any door, to get away from that impossible smile. He turned sharply down another aisle, the whispering hum swelling overhead. The storm outside was gone. No rain against the glass, no thunder, just the station, sealed, breathing around him like a living lung. His hands skimmed the shelves, desperately searching for something real, something solid, when his fingers brushed cold metal, a handle. He gripped it and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow hallway behind the aisles. The air that spilled out was colder, sharper, like a draft from an open grave. He hesitated, but then the whispering lights above flared. and he heard the dragging steps approaching fast. With no other choice, he slipped inside and shut the door behind him. The hallway was wrong. It shouldn't have been there. From outside, the station was no more than a box, a single room and counter. But this hallway stretched deep into shadow, lined with doors on either side. Each door bore no labels, only numbers carved crudely into the wood, uneven and trembling, as if etched by shaking hands. 3, 7, 11, 19. The trucker's breath plumed white in the freezing air. The hum was gone now, replaced by something softer, a muffled chorus, faint and broken, like voices speaking through walls of earth. He leaned closer to one of the doors. The whispers sharpened into words, pleading words, begging for release. He jerked back, bile rising in his throat. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Slow, deliberate. The man. He didn't need to look to know. That smile would be inches away if he turned. The trucker pushed forward, deeper into the corridor, past door after door. His hand brushed one knob and the metal burned like ice. Another rattled violently on its own, as if something on the other side was trying to claw its way out. At the end of the hallway, a final door loomed. Unlike the others, this one was painted black, its surface scarred with deep gouges. Something inside was breathing, low, guttural, animalistic. The trucker reached for the knob, his instincts screaming at him not to. And then he heard it. His name, whispered from the other side, drawn out in a voice that was not his own, not the man's, but something deeper. His hand trembled on the knob. Behind him, the footsteps stopped. Silence pressed down. He turned his head slowly and saw the man standing halfway down the hall, closer now, his smile splitting wider than ever before. His arms hung limply at his sides, fingers twitching like marionette strings. The trucker yanked the black door open. Darkness swallowed him whole, cold and absolute. The last thing he saw before it closed was that impossible smile, stretching past the limits of flesh. Inside, there was no hallway, no shelves, no station, just a room. And in the center of it, something was waiting. The black door closed behind him with a groan, sealing the trucker in a silence so complete it pressed against his eardrums. The air was heavier here, colder, thick as though it hadn't been touched by breath in decades. He held himself still, waiting for his eyes to adjust. But the dark wasn't empty. It was dense. It clung to him, damp and oily, crawling over his jacket, soaking into his skin. Then, a sound, a drip, slow and rhythmic, echoing as though water fell onto stone. His boots shifted against the floor, and he realized it wasn't tile anymore. It was dirt, packed earth, uneven and soft, as though he stood inside a freshly dug grave. A faint glow seeped into the room, not from bulbs, but from the walls themselves. Veins of pale, phosphorescent light pulsed in the dirt, glowing faintly like fireflies trapped in clay. With each pulse, the room revealed itself, and he wished it hadn't. The walls weren't straight. They curved inward, bulging, shifting like lungs inhaling. In some places, the dirt gave way to bone, long pale arcs jutting out, rib-like, as though the room had grown around something buried. And in the center, under the faint glow, was an altar, a crude slab of stone, slick with stains too dark to be anything but blood. Chains hung from it, links rusted and wet. The drip came from above. He tilted his head back. The ceiling was low, dirt packed with roots, but here and there strands of hair hung down through the soil. Human hair, black, blonde, gray, braided and tangled, dripping with moisture that smelled of rot. His breath quickened. He turned, desperate to find the door again. But the wall was solid, seamless dirt, no sign of where he'd entered. The black door was gone. And then came the voices. Not whispers now, but murmurs rising in the soil, seeping through the glowing veins. Words without mouths, cries without bodies. He staggered back from the altar, but the voices followed, wrapping around his ears, weaving into his head. Some begged, some warned, some screamed. He pressed his palms to his skull, teeth gritted. "Stop," he hissed, though his own voice sounded thin and swallowed by the dark. The voices hushed. For a moment, there was nothing but his breath. Then, another voice, low and familiar, slithered from the room itself. The voice of the man behind the counter. "You shouldn't be here." He spun. No figure stood with him, only shadows shifting across the glowing walls. His pulse thundered. He stumbled toward the altar, searching for any crack, any sign of escape. But as he drew closer, he froze. There were carvings etched into the stone. Not letters, not words. Faces. Dozens of faces, pressed into the slab, mouths open in eternal screams, eyes wide, as though they had been swallowed by the rock itself. He staggered back. His heel caught on something soft. He glanced down. A boot. Old cracked leather, attached to a leg. The rest of the body lay half buried in the soil, face down, arms twisted at unnatural angles. Not the first driver to find this place, not the first to never leave. The glow brightened, pulsing faster now, and the voices rose with it. They were no longer separate, but a single chorus, chanting in broken rhythm. The earth beneath him shifted, trembling, and the altar shuddered as though something below strained against the chains. The trucker's chest heaved. He clawed at the walls, dirt crumbling under his nails, trying to dig his way back out. His fingers caught bone. A skull stared back at him from the soil, grinning wide. And then, movement. The chains rattled. The slab trembled. Something beneath the altar inhaled. A long, wet breath, pulling the air from the room, dragging it into the soil. His lungs burned. He staggered back, clutching at his chest, as the glow flared brighter and the faces carved into the stone began to move. Their eyes opened, their mouths wailed, and the altar began to rise. The altar shuddered as it rose, dragging chains taut, links clanging against the stone like the toll of a funeral bell. The soil split beneath it, cracking open like a wound that had never healed. A fetid draft exhaled from the gap, cold enough to sting the trucker's skin. The veins of pale light running through the walls pulsed faster now, bleeding into the fissure, spilling a sickly glow into the pit below. He stumbled back, boots slipping in loose dirt, eyes locked on the altar as the thing beneath began to climb free. It wasn't one creature, it was many. Limbs spilled from the wound in the earth, pale and twitching, some bent backward, some jointed in too many places. Fingers clawed against the walls like hooked insects, scraping stone and bone. Faces surfaced through the mass, half-formed, fused together, screaming in silence. Mouths opened and closed with no sound, as though the air itself strangled them. Each face was stolen, borrowed from someone else. Truckers, travelers, people who had once walked through the same door. Their features melted into one another, twisted into something that was never meant to exist. The trucker pressed himself against the wall, chest heaving, throat tight. His mind begged to wake, begged to believe this was nightmare, hallucination, madness. But the smell of rot and damp earth was real. The trembling ground was real, and the thing dragging itself free was impossibly, horrifically real. The voices that had whispered from the walls now rose in a deafening chorus. Not whispers anymore. Commands: feed, stay, join. The altar's chains snapped with a sound like bones breaking. The mass surged upward, dragging itself out of the pit, filling the room with a stench so foul it clawed into his lungs. He gagged, eyes watering, bile burning the back of his throat. The faces in the creature's flesh turned toward him, their mouths stretching wide, as if they could taste him already. He spun, clawing at the dirt walls, desperate for escape. His fingernails ripped against stone and bone, leaving blood on the soil. And then, there it was, the black door, just behind him. Standing open, waiting. Through it he saw the station again, the aisles, the counter, the storm outside, alive with rain, normal, empty, as if nothing had ever happened, but not empty. The man was there, thin, still, smiling. His eyes locked onto the trucker's, wide and unblinking, as though he'd been watching the entire time. The trucker's lungs burned as the crawling mass surged forward. Limbs snapped against the dirt, scraping closer, faces wailing in silence. He had seconds, maybe less. He lurched toward the door but froze just shy of crossing, because the man was speaking again. His lips hardly moved, yet his words filled the room. "You can leave," he rasped, "but the storm will bring you back. It always does. No one leaves with just gas." The trucker's breath rattled in his chest. His hand gripped the frame of the black door so tightly his knuckles cracked. Behind him the thing closed in, chains dragging, faces splitting wider, mouths spilling black fluid onto the earth. The air thickened, trembling with the weight of all the voices begging him to stay. For one heartbeat he thought of giving up, letting it take him, letting the screaming faces absorb him so that maybe his suffering would end. But another voice, his own, rose above the din, raw and desperate. "Move. Now." With a final burst, he lunged through the doorway. His body struck the tile floor of the gas station, the hum of the fluorescents crashing back into his ears. He scrambled to his feet, spinning, gasping, but the black door was gone. Nothing remained but a blank stretch of wall, shelves stacked neatly with dust-covered cans, their labels smiling at him as though nothing had happened. Behind the counter, the man still stood, still smiling, still waiting. His voice slipped into the silence like a blade drawn across stone. "Now you've seen it. You'll carry it, and the road will carry you back." The trucker bolted for the glass doors. The storm had returned, howling, rain hammering the lot in sheets. His rig still waited by the pump, headlights dim in the downpour. He didn't look back. Couldn't. His boots pounded across the gravel, his hands fumbling for the cab. The engine roared to life. Headlights cut through the rain as he yanked the wheel, gravel spraying beneath his tires. His heart slammed against his ribs as the gas station receded behind him, swallowed by darkness. But in the mirror, just before the storm erased it from view, he saw the neon sign. No longer broken, no longer flickering. Perfectly alive, burning brighter than before. Open. And the storm carried him away, but not far enough. Because no matter how long the road stretched ahead, he knew the station wasn't finished with him. Some stories end when the headlights fade into the storm. This one does not, because the trucker didn't leave that station behind. He carried it with him. Every mile of dark asphalt, every diner he stopped at, every mirror he glanced into. The station was there, watching, waiting. The gas station that should have been abandoned is never truly empty. It waits for the desperate, the lost, the tired who think a little fuel will keep them safe. And when they step inside, when they breathe that stale air, the road itself decides if they'll ever walk out again. Some don't. Some vanish without a trace. And some, like him, escape, only to find escape is the cruelest trick of all. So if you're out there tonight, listening in the dark, remember this. The next time your tank runs low in a storm and a neon sign flickers on a lonely stretch of highway, ask yourself if that station should even be standing. Ask yourself if it's waiting for you. And if you survived this journey with me, share your thoughts below. Tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country. And if you're brave enough, tell me which haunted road you'd never dare to drive alone. Because the station is still out there, and it is open.